Welcome. Today, we're going to unpack two really dominant and often totally competing ways of thinking about how to predict, well, what the stock market's going to do next.
I mean, it's the multi-trillion-dollar question for any investor, isn't it? And, it turns out there isn't just one easy answer. The market is kind of like this huge battleground of different ideas, and today we're going to look at the two biggest armies clashing on that field. Okay, so there are basically three main paths people take to forecast prices. You've got fundamental analysis, technical analysis, and something called information analysis. We'll touch on that third one a little later, but really, our main event today is the big showdown, the daily clash between those two major rivals, fundamental and technical.
All right, let's kick things off with our first philosophy. Meet the fundamental analyst. We're going to call them the value detective for a reason, because their entire job is to dig deep, look past the hype, and find the real story behind a company.
So the core belief here, the thing that drives everything they do, is that every single stock has an intrinsic value. Think of it as its true worth, and the detective's whole mission is to figure out exactly what that number is, totally separate from whatever the crazy market price is doing on any given day.
So what is this intrinsic value thing anyway? Well, it's what a company is truly worth, based on all the nitty-gritty details, its assets, its earnings, its financial health, you name it. A good way to think about it is, it's the price you'd be willing to pay if you were buying the entire company, not just a handful of shares. And this is where the strategy really comes to life. The whole game for the detective is to find a gap between that market price and the intrinsic value they've calculated. So if the stock is trading below its true value, that's a potential buy signal. But if it's trading way above its true value, the bet is that eventually gravity's going to take over and the price will have to come back down to reality.
So how do they find this value? Well, our detective gets to work, poring over all the clues. We're talking about digging through financial statements, analyzing things like earnings per share, looking at PE ratios to figure out if a stock is cheap or pricey, and they're even zooming out, looking at the big picture, the overall economic conditions.
Okay, now let's flip the script completely and turn to our other contender, who could not be more different. Meet the technical analyst. And we're going to call this one the chart artist, because for them, the price chart isn't just a tool. It's the whole canvas. It's everything.
Yeah, the chart artist's whole philosophy is that everything, and I mean everything, you could possibly need to know is already right there on the price chart. They believe the pictured history of a stock's price holds all the clues you need to guess its probable future trend.
Seriously, they argue that all that fundamental stuff, the earnings reports, the debt levels, the latest news, what the CEO had for breakfast, it's all already baked right into the price you see on your screen. So why bother with the why? For them, that's a waste of time. They believe the what, the price itself, is everything.
And this is where it gets really interesting because it taps into human psychology. The chart artist operates on the assumption that market patterns repeat themselves because, well, people don't really change. The same basic emotions, fear, greed, hope, that drove investors 100 years ago are still driving them today. People just keep making the same mistakes.
So, the artist's palette, their toolkit, is full of things like price action, that's the big one, trading volume, identifying specific chart patterns, and spotting trend lines. It's all built on that core assumption that history, driven by our very human emotions, tends to repeat itself.
Okay, so before we get to the big detective versus artist showdown, we should probably give a quick nod to that third path we mentioned earlier, information analysis.
Now, this approach is all about using non-public information, the juicy stuff, like finding out about a merger before it's announced. It can give you a huge advantage for sure, but it's also usually super illegal. We're talking insider trading. So yeah, that's why we're focusing on the two main strategies that are actually available to the rest of us.
All right, it's time for the main event. Let's put our value detective and our chart artist into the ring, head to head, and really break down how they see the world.
Okay, so if you remember one thing, make it this. The value detective, our fundamentalist, studies the causes of price moves. They're obsessed with the why, like what in the company's earnings is making this happen. The chart artist, our technical analyst, studies the effects. They only care about the what. What is the price itself doing on the chart right now?
And this chart here just lays it all out perfectly. Look at their main concerns. The detective is all about intrinsic value, while the artist only cares about price action. The detective is trying to figure out which company to invest in, but the artist, they're trying to figure out when to invest in a company. See? Completely different questions coming from completely different worlds.
So after all that, who's the winner? Who's right? The detective or the artist? Well, the answer might actually surprise you. It turns out this might not be a fight to the death after all.
The truth is, it's not really about which one is better. It's about which one is right for the job you're trying to do. It's like arguing about whether a hammer is better than a screwdriver. They're both just tools, right? They're designed for completely different tasks.
And here's how that usually breaks down in the real world. If you're a long-term investor looking to find a solid, undervalued company to buy and hold for years, well, fundamental analysis is probably your best friend. But if you're a short-term trader trying to time the market and pinpoint the perfect entry and exit points, technical analysis is going to be your go-to tool.
So what's the ultimate takeaway here? You know, a lot of the most successful investors don't actually pick a side. They create a blend of both. They might use fundamental analysis, the detective's work, to figure out what to buy, and then use technical analysis, the artist's canvas, to decide when to buy it. And that really just leaves one last question for you to think about. Are you a detective, an artist, or maybe a little bit of both?